Welcome to Rapid Fire Wednesday, Q&A for corporate immigration professionals. I'm Kimberley Robidoux, partner in our San Diego office of WR Immigration. And I'm here today with my fire twin, Miki Matrician, who's the co-managing partner of our Boston office. Good to see you today, Miki.
Hi, Kim.
So for today's installment, we are discussing visits by USCIS's Fraud Detection and National Security section, which is FDNS. So given this administration's focus on enforcement and anticipated compliance reviews, this is a timely topic to address with global mobility and HR professionals. USCIS's FDNS agency, as the name suggests, aims to cover or uncover immigration fraud. It sends officers to work sites to do this review in order to verify H-1B, L-1, and religious workers. And then also prior to adjudication, EB-5 immigrant investor programs are also subjected to FDNS review as well. So it's important to note that employer participation in a site visit is voluntary. And so while it is strongly encouraged by USCIS, it is voluntary. But if the employer or the employee state that they're unwilling to participate in the compliance review, the FDNS officer can end and typically will end the site visit and then conducts the review strictly based on the information and documentation available to the officer, which may not be a good thing sometimes. So employers need to be careful about denying a work site visit. We'll talk a little bit more about that. However, we have seen instances where the FDNS officer may, instead of showing up at the work site, email the employer or the employee to verify certain data points. And the response to this email is also voluntary. But while this participation is voluntary, failure to reply may result in a notice of intent to revoke the petition, which is pretty significant. So, Miki, can you discuss what kinds of information the FDNS officer is typically looking to verify during one of these site visits?
Sure. Yeah. So, in general, the officer is looking to confirm that the sponsored employees employed pursuant to the terms and conditions of the petition that USCIS had approved. So, that means they want to make sure that the employees working in the same location, the same position as indicated in the position, and that they're also doing the job, so the job duties as indicated in the petition. The officer will likely also want to verify the salary that's being paid to the employee, that it meets or exceeds the salary in the petition. They could also ask for additional details about the company, the employer's business, or about who the sponsored employee reports up to. And in order to confirm those pieces of information, they may show up at the work site. And that could include the work from home location, right? And they could ask to interview the sponsored employee. Sometimes they also want to interview the employee's manager and or colleagues to make sure that the answers don't contradict what is included in the petition.
Yeah, and I think it's also important for employers and the sponsored employees to know that these site visits are routine. They've been going on for a number of years. And a site visit does not mean that the employer or the employee are in any kind of trouble, right? It's kind of, they just want to uncover fraud. So this is one of the ways that they said it to do this. So that being said, it's best for global mobility and immigration professionals, as well as for foreign national employees and their supervising managers, to be prepared in advance of a site visit. So some employers who have received site visits end up having the same FDNS officer come every few years, or sometimes we've seen it every couple of months. Not always, but that's in rare instances. And so the officers get a little bit familiar with the organization and or that HR global mobility contact. And then other times it's a new officer that comes every time to the organization. So, Mickey, what are some of the tips that you have for employers to get ready for a site visit?
So I think the first thing to know is that it's not just the sponsored employee or the manager or HR global mobility professionals to be ready. It's also important to let your front desk staff know at your office locations about the possibility of this happening and how to approach it. So I would say it's a good idea to give them the primary immigration contact in human resources or global mobility handy, and also the immigration attorney's contact information as well. It is permitted to have the attorney be present in person or by phone throughout the visit, as well as the HR or global mobility contact. And I think it's also important to think about the fact that these days, when scams are so common, it's necessary to verify that the person in front of you who is claiming to be an FDNS officer is indeed an FDNS officer. And so, if it's in person, the front desk should always ask to see the officer's badge and note down the badge number and the person's name and contact information for future reference, so that that information can be supplied to immigration counsel. And then if it's an inquiry by email, make sure that the email is from a sender that has a .gov email address. And then if my client receives the phone call, I usually have them ask the officer to send an email so that then we can verify the identity of the person as well.
Yeah, those are good tips, Mickey. So as you mentioned, we usually recommend that, counsel be present at the site visit. And a lot of times that's usually just on the phone, right? Listening in and speaking when necessary. So sometimes FDNS officers ask questions that are beyond their scope. And it's important for immigration counsel to be able to advise on what to answer and what not to answer. Often FDNS officers ask for documents that a company should not have to provide. So just being aware of what should be provided or what shouldn't be provided, because it could be an overreach by that FDNS officer either on purpose or by mistake. So it's really helpful in a lot of instances to have an attorney who's involved and participates in the site visit. We understand that an employer representative and or the employee might want to answer questions, right? Get really, really nervous. Just answer everything to make sure that there's not going to be any negative repercussions, or provide any documentation that's requested. And it's really our guidance is to not do so when there's documentation or information that does not need to be disclosed, that is not relevant to the petition, because that's what FDNS is reviewing, right, Mickey? They're reviewing, did the employer accurately state what the position is, and is the employee, performing those duties and receiving the salary as stated? So those are really important things to remember. So, we communicate to the employee that they should ask the FDNS officer to email their HR global mobility contact if an FDNS officer, potentially shows up at their door. As you mentioned, Mickey, there are a lot of remote employees now. So it is possible with the address being on the LCA that the officer can show up at an employee's address. So we want to make sure that the officer sends the email to the global mobility or HR contact so that the response can be provided in writing. That way there's no potential misunderstanding or discrepancies. And then, as well, if the employee is working at a home site or a third party site, as noted in the petition, we want to make sure that the information that is provided and the documentation is accurate. So a lot of times it's really best to handle that response through an email. If the FDNS officer appears at the company office where the employee is working, it is definitely appropriate to ask the FDNS officer to come in and conduct the review in a conference room, right, in a place that is private, and where they would be able to talk, and then also bring the attorney in on the intercom, or so to speak, the speaker with the telephone. Those things that we used to use at the offices. So, with that being said, for the employer and the employee, they should be prepared. They should know the contents of the approved petition. And there's also, what additional documentation or tips do you have, Mickey, for our audience with respect to these site visits?
Like you already mentioned, Kim, it's important that the sponsored employee's answers regarding job and job duties don't contradict what's in the petition. So, if there's discrepancies, they could face a notice of intent to revoke the petition. So, it's really goes to the employee reading through their petition and knowing what's in there. And if they notice that the job is not what's stated in the petition, or maybe it's changed, they should notify human resources or global mobility right away so they can work with counsel to make sure that any additional steps that need to be taken are taken to ensure compliance. And it's also important for employees to know that they are not required to provide confidential or proprietary company information. And so the employee can kind of refer back to the HR global mobility professional to answer those questions or counsel. Um, and then also, if the FDNS officer shows up at the foreign national employee's home work site, they can ask them to come back at a later time and make sure that HR and the attorney are on the phone with them as well. That's totally permitted and recommended. The FDNS officer can also ask the employee to log into their computer, and it's completely appropriate to refuse to show the officer any proprietary or confidential information. For HR and global mobility side, it's a good time to audit your records. Match up what your HR systems say, are the job title, work location, salary, and make sure that it's not contradicting what's in the petition. I think one thing to note particularly is the work site. If the employee is changed from working from home arrangement to going back into the office, does the petition cover both locations? And then, with technology allowing so much remote work, some of my clients have had situations in which they've discovered that, oh, this employee is working from a different state. You know, they're visiting family for a long period of time and they're working from that state, and those kinds of things crop up now. So I think it's important to communicate with the foreign national population about the importance of notifying HR and global mobility so that both the employer and employee can be compliant. I think it's also important for the foreign national employee to know what to do, what to expect if an FDNS officer knocks on their door. And people don't often realize how important the work site is for visas like the H-1B, and how not letting HR know might result in unexpected adverse consequences for their current visa status or future sponsorship. So, it's important that the foreign national employee know their rights, and that they can ask the FDNS officer to come back later if they show up at their home, and that they can ask the officer to wait outside until the employee gets HR, global mobility, or attorney on the line.
Yeah, those are really good points, Mickey. The education and the communication is really essential, especially now with everything that's happening during the beginning of the Trump administration. And the other thing that, HR, global mobility, and foreign nationals should remember is that if an employee, is working from their home, that's their work site location. So they need to provide that information to HR so that another posting might be needed or an amended petition. But they also have to remember to notify the government of their change of address. And as a reminder, all non immigrant workers must file the Form AR-11 within 10 days of any change of address. And this is for anybody who is not a US citizen. And this is something that this new administration may enforce in the future, as we saw back in the early 2000s. And then for people in F, J, or M status, they need to notify their schools and update their CETUS records. So those are important reminders. And I guess that's a wrap for today's session on work sites and what to expect. So stay tuned for future episodes on updates to the immigration landscape. And if you don't already, follow WR Immigration as well as Mickey and my individual profiles. And then we also transcribe this live stream and post it to a weekly newsletter that you can subscribe to. And the link to subscribe will be in the comments. So thanks, everyone, and good to see you again, Mickey.
Good to see you, Kim. Thank you.